Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. Sorry for the delay. We were having technical difficulties, but we should be up and running now. As always, let us know if there's a problem. We want to get it fixed. We obviously want you guys to have an enjoyable show, and nobody likes watching with technical errors. So let us know if there's any problems, and we're going to try to deal with it here live on stream. But hopefully, you guys are all having a great night. Hopefully, you guys are excited for Star Wars Celebration because we have a lot to talk about in regards to Star Wars Celebration. A little bit of a slower news week, but that's anticipated. We're getting all of our news this weekend at Star Wars Celebration, but some things have trickled out there preemptively before Star Wars Celebration comes out. So we're going to talk about some of those releases, some of those announcements, some of the things we have to look forward to at Celebration, as well as some other rumors and news around Andor Season 2. We have Revenge of the Sith tickets just went on sale for the 20th anniversary. So we're going to talk about that, as well as taking your guys' questions, because of course, as always, this is a live Q&A. So if you guys want to send us questions about anything you want, send it into the chat. We take all of your guys' questions, and just to promote the chat even more, this is going to be our last stream in this fashion before we have Andor Season 2. Now, we do plan on having some streams this weekend covering all the celebration announcements. That will be focused on news mostly. Andor Season 2 for 4 weeks will be focused completely on Andor. So for about a month or so, this will be the last chance you have to ask us anything you want. So if you have any questions that aren't about Star Wars or anything you've been wanting to get off your head, get off your mind, let us know in the chat, and we will answer anything you would like to discuss. If you answer some, or if you ask a question that goes with one of our topics, we'll incorporate it in the conversation. Super Chat bumps you up to the top of the priority list. If you're a member of the Rebel tier or higher on our Patreon or YouTube membership programs, you get priority chat access. If you're part of YouTube memberships, should just be an option for you to send in a chat that way. If you are part of Patreon, you're going to have to comment on the Patreon page and let us know either your YouTube handle or let us know your chat in that comment section, and then we'll bring it up here on the stream. All right, so without further ado, let's get into our first topic. And I think the biggest thing we had happen this week, biggest news of the week, is going to be the announcement of Star Wars Zero Company. This is a confirmation. We've known about this for a long time. It just didn't have a name. This is a Bit Reactor Star Wars turn-based tactical game. Some confirmation about not only the title, but that it's going to be showcased at Celebration. And we also have the fact that it's a turn-based tactical game, which most tactical games are, but that's a confirmation that this is more in the realm of Gears Tactics, which Bit Reactor has also made, XCOM, Final Fantasy Tactics, Fire Emblem, those types of games. That's what this is birthed out of. So if you were hoping for the next Empire at War, that's not what this is. That's a real-time strategy game. They're very different genres. This is its own turn-based first person, or I mean, not first person, the first Star Wars tactics game, first big Star Wars tactics game that hasn't been, I guess, a mobile app. So we're excited to talk about this. I'm very excited. And from the art, there's a lot of stuff that's hinted here. I mean, all we got from this so far is just a Twitter post by EA Star Wars confirming that the name of the game is Star Wars Zero Company. But if you look at the art, that's what's super intriguing. So you have a Jedi, you have a clone trooper, you have a Mandalorian, you have kind of a scoundrel looking rebel type character who's holding a hologram of a battle droid, and then you have an R2 unit and another guy who looks pretty cool in a suit with a gun. So this mostly looks Clone Wars era because you have the Jedi, you have the clone, you have the rest of the group, you have the battle droid and the hologram. This looks like it's Clone Wars era. Now, it could be something that branches across the entirety of the Star Wars timeline. It could start Clone Wars era and then go Dark Times, then go Rebel Alliance. You see these characters grow and change. But just from this first image, assuming these are our main characters, that this is kind of our main squad, our main Zero Company set of characters, I think this looks pretty cool. And I'm excited for something to go back in that kind of prequels era for video games, because we haven't really gone that way in a long time. A lot of our video games, most of our video games in the Disney era of Star Wars have focused on stuff from the Dark Times or later. So pretty exciting to go back to that era. Sonic, when you heard the name of the game, when you saw the art, when you heard that it's going to be confirmed turn-based tactical, what were your thoughts on the announcement of Zero Company?
I wasn't entirely surprised just because I had seen something that had kind of leaked that looked like, okay, yeah, that might be a Clone Wars set game. Um, I think it was a little bit more exaggerated, like a little bit more the Clone Warsy, as opposed to building off of it, making some realistic features and all that, kind of like how a lot of the turn-based mobile games and stuff like that have done it pretty recently. So, again, this art is art. You don't know how it's gonna 100% translate. We don't really have a a proper preview. Whatever was shown seemed more like an alpha with just with existing assets and all that. So I don't know how to feel. I'm very curious to know though that like with this game kinda having this ragtag group, are we gonna be following some sort of story with them? And is it gonna be just like the character models and then we see dialogue boxes? Or are we moving into trying to push it to a little bit more modern sense, a little bit more closer close-ups, maybe some scripted stuff, some cinematic stuff, and then be able to jump into the turn base. I think at the end of the day, Star Wars is built off of cinematic language. That's how we expect our comics to feel like, our books to feel like, everything. So I would like that to happen in the games, especially with how immersive some of them have come, especially like the Jedi Fallen Order, Survivor, and Outlaws. So add to that. Add to that. I don't think you have to live by that. It doesn't have to be as polished or pure, but I think it'd be fun to get to know these characters, especially in an era that I don't think we necessarily had to go back to, right? So, if it was just clones, honestly, I would not have really enjoyed that much, but it seems like there's a good mix here, and I'm like, "Alright, yeah, I'd like to see a little bit more of the underworld, more mercenary hire, kinda stuff that a lot of the '03 Clone Wars initiative onwards kind of try to do, and then '08 does it, but '08 kind of focuses more on the wars the clones end up being part of, as opposed to, like, all the different factions, all the little intricacies, all the middlemen that are eventual in war and frankly, in anything, right? So uh, I'm curious to see how if a lot of the stuff that's so core to a lot of what we understand of the original trilogy, and even to a degree the sequel trilogy, but isn't really super present in the prequels. I wonder if they're trying to flesh out that side, and then happen to make also some cool stuff that's unfamiliar ground, like with Clone Wars-esque battles and stuff like that. So seems fun. We have some precedent too with some of the old Battlefront games, with like X1 and X2, like trying to do something a little bit different with the formula. This seems like, yeah, they're trying to do something a little bit with different with the formula, but hey, let's actually, like, possibly analyze, like, what people's lives are like and how they began to slide to where they are to become the icons that they are, or, like, just the way of life being so normalized in the original trilogy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this type of game, seeing this type of variety and obviously not just unit types, but the tactical advantage that you can have during the Clone Wars with this many different factions, this many different characters, I think provides really interesting gameplay opportunities. So I'm excited just from that standpoint, like looking at the fact that you do have a Jedi. Like I Jedi didn't necessarily come into my head when we were
Yeah.
originally talking about this type of game because it seems like a type of character that'll be a little overpowered in a strategy game, right? A tactics game. But here, if it is in the midst of the Clone Wars, if you are facing giant droid armadas and stuff like that, like wow, very, very cool. I can't wait to see what they have in store here. I'm interested, like you said earlier, what we get from the story. Like, is it fully voice acted? Is it full of cutscenes? Are there just text boxes? I would be okay with either way. I mean, we have great, you know, 2D old bits and sprite games that have wonderful stories that are all text based, right? So they can do a great game like that. I imagine it's going to be fully voice acted and have full cutscenes considering what their work has been in the past. That's mostly what they've done. But I'm excited for an original story in the Clone Wars. I think it's going to be awesome. Hopefully it has some really in-depth gameplay and this company Bit Reactor has lived up to expectations before with all their other games. Even the Marvel game they put out a few years ago, the Midnight Suns game, that game got good reviews. People don't really play it, but got good reviews, and I always wanted to try that one. But I've played XCOM, and I loved XCOM back in the day, all the 360 games and some of the early Xbox One games. So I really enjoyed those games. I love Fire Emblem. So this seems like just such a great next step for Star Wars, and one of the things we've just been begging them to do in even though this is from EA, in the midst of like the move away from EA to Lucasfilm Games, being able to do whatever you want. This is the type of game that EA I don't think would have taken a risk on
No.
when they had full control over everything. So the fact that they have to come up with new ideas and kind of blow Lucasfilm Games away with a pitch now, I think that's something that leads to even more optimism around Star Wars games here in the future. And I'm pretty darn excited for Zero Company. We have a lot of comments here in the comments section in the chat room talking about this game. Anthony says, I'm thinking the dude in the suit is an Umbaran. It kind of looks like it.
Yeah.
Definitely could be an option. That would be really cool if it is. I love his suit in general. Love the gun. I love the sniper rifle. That's going to be your long distance character. This squad just looks like they're going to work so well together. Like all different varied abilities. That's going to be really really cool. Darth Cat says XCOM Star Wars Edition. Definitely. And Anthony, YouTube fan, says, hi guys. Not far from taking a shower. Had a long day, but I'm glad to be here. Yes, I'm stoked for Star Wars Zero Company. The picture is cool. Hope it's a good story. Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the big selling points. But this type of game, I think, can be amazing without having the world's greatest story because we just haven't experienced this in Star Wars before. So if you nail the combat, if you nail the experience, this can still be an incredibly memorable Star Wars game.
Yeah. I mean, just to add to, like, what has already been shown here, like, I'm never not gonna try out a Star Wars game, especially since the canon reset. It's just there's more money, there's more time, there's a lot more variety since EA has gone, like Liam said, and there's still Filoni or otherwise, a real sense of, like, trying to make everything be one canon, right? So I wanna see how it plays into this, especially even if I don't love that it's in Clone Wars, I wanna know what it says about the Clone Wars, what it's gonna flesh out, like, if this is I mean, based on just seeing a Phase 1 clone trooper, right, in the company, right? Maybe this is, like, stuff that happens, like, in the first few days. Maybe this is a way we get some adaptations of, like, '03 Clone Wars that, like, the Brotherhood books make mention of, like, oh, the Dantooine Mace Windu droids and stuff on Monoliths or stuff like that, right? Like, if we can get maybe hints of that while they're not directly attached to it or they're in the they're doing cleanup in that sector after something like that. I love that. Like, just make other parts of canon, regardless of medium, feel strengthened and bonded by these connections here. So if this is set in an early Clone Wars, I'd like that more, especially in that gap that we have between Attack of the Clones and the Clone Wars. I know '03 Clone Wars still, because of Brotherhood, really does fit in there, and that was the original intention when '08 Clone Wars started, but they quickly kinda got away from that. So,
Mhm.
I'm very curious to see if they what they can fit back in and all that, because it's not a bad thing to do. It's just, when Lucasfilm was doing all these different things, they had a story group for books, for games like that, they were used to that. George pop in here and there, that's cool, right? But he wouldn't dictate it. Obviously, once he came and wanted to do The Clone Wars, it changes everything. So I think it's not talked about as much compared to, like, full EU reset, but George already kinda had his own revolution against his brand, and he was like, that was never real. That was just me licensing out." Despite all the love and intention that he probably did give it, it still wasn't his baby, right? So, I'm very curious of what they can salvage, what they can enhance, and what they can bridge together. That's always gonna be the nice thing about games like this in canon to me, even if they're non-essential to the great, great plots. If it's good, that's what matters more. It doesn't have to be the biggest thing. Like, you could argue Andor Season 1 is not the biggest thing, but man, it's really good, right? And it gives us more reasons to care about a character who, who is solid, but nothing super special in Rogue One. And now you're like, "Oh my god," watching that show going into it. But it's not a huge story. So I hope for something like this out of this game too.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think character really carries these stories when we've seen it throughout canon novels, but even looking at the biggest successes of Star Wars video games in the canon era, the Jedi games, they're heavily carried by character. And
Yeah.
even though Survivor pushes the story into a much bigger scope, both games are very much so things that we've seen before, enhanced by wonderful characters and great dynamics. And so I think at the minimum, this can do that if you give us great character. stories, and as great as the Clone Wars is as a show, it doesn't ever get quite as dark as some of the darkest novels of the 2003 Initiative books, as some of the darker games that we got. Like Republic Commando is violent and brutal, and so it'll be interesting to see how dark we get with this type of game. Now, I'm no by no means expecting it to be rated M or anything, but I think we could tell a little bit darker type of story here,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
if you have characters who are all unknown. You never know what's going to happen to them. They could
Yeah.
die. Some people could die if they actually went the full like Final Fantasy route. I mean, not Final Fantasy, Fire Emblem route, and characters could get killed in the story if you're not careful enough with them. Like, that could be really cool as well. I don't think they'll do that specifically, but be interesting if they went that route. But in general, I am excited for kind of a new take, a re-emerged take from the old days of Legends when we didn't have a Clone Wars and you got stories from, Zahn and Heir to the Empire, or throughout the early EU where people were speculating on what were the Clone Wars, and it was filled with a lot of battles with real people, not necessarily just Jedi, just droids, just clones. I want to see those people who were involved in the conflict brought back in a great way too. So, pretty excited for that. Yes, Anthony, YouTube fan, we'll get to Master of Evil next, but let's see who else. Rebel Soldier Dom says, "When do you guys speculate Zero Company will come out?" That's a great question too. It's interesting when you're looking at a game of this genre, right? Because Star Wars in general should be a triple A release no matter what. It should be kind of able to come out whenever because you would expect people to be interested in buying it. Wasn't the case necessarily last year with Outlaws, which underperformed in sales. Originally, they opted for a release window that's not necessarily the most popular, end of summer, beginning of fall. It's a time window that not too many people release games because kids are going back to school. So you have a big part of your market share who's now not nearly as free as they were in the summer. So it makes more sense sometimes to release games in the summer. Be interesting to see, and I think we'll see at this panel. I don't think this game is going to be on Switch 2 yet, or confirmed to be on Switch 2, but if it was a Switch 2 game and it did want to capitalize on that Switch 2 hype in the summer, we could get a summer release for this. It does seem a lot further along than I even thought, but we've been hearing about this game forever, and they have seemingly gone all in with this for this year's release. And so it wouldn't shock me if it was announced for the summer. But ultimately, when it comes to EA games, especially, most of the time you're expecting a fall release, whether that's October or
Yeah.
November. We'll see. I don't know if Star Wars Zero Company can like go toe to toe with the big hitters of the fall, especially if you're trying to get some Christmas revenue out of, the holiday season, really make that holiday push. I don't know if Star Wars Zero Company will be that full holiday push unless it gets amazing reviews, right? If it gets Outlaws reviews or slightly better, if it's like 8 out of 10-ish reviews, then I think it could be better to have its own time for release where it doesn't have as much competition, especially with games if they do go up in price. I don't imagine games going up to $80 this year across the board, but Nintendo's starting that, and it's going to happen here at some point, especially with so much money out there for certain games now with a new Switch coming out with people wanting to save their money for that. I think people's video game budgets might be a little tighter than usual. So if you can capitalize on Switch 2 hype, I think summer might make the most sense, but I'm anticipating like an October-ish release for this game.
Yeah, and we have to also consider that maybe that this is not a full well, I mean, with the Switch 2 games now being 79.99 digital and 89.99 or something physical, it's like, is that gonna change Xbox's market, PlayStation's market, and then maybe even PCs? Hopefully not. I hope that's just that Nintendo just sometimes they have a little bit of a power trip and they just think that they're the best of the world, but, they're the best at what they do. I'll give them that, but that's not the same thing. But I hope the game stays cheaper, but I hope maybe this is priced like how Squadrons was. Squadrons was
That'd be great.
$40. It was a lot more cinematic, and it made sense because it's a full simulator. You're in there, you're adjusting speed, throttle, everything, right? And it's not like, arcadey style. fighter pilot situation. It was like, no, you're like first voice person point of view. You're changing. You're never like zoomed out to full third person. Like it was serious. It was like definitely focused on the combat and all that. And you know, a lot of the campaign felt like training at times and some challenges, but it was still cool, and you get to talk to your crewmates. Just it's like a slightly polished version of what you can do by just walking up to them and walking up to your latest ship, right? And all that. So yeah, they didn't do so much there. In some places, they did a lot. I wonder if you can do the same thing here, and especially because this would be something that'd be way better as third person, right? And you get to see these characters, wanna see more of the landscapes, maybe make it a little bit more polished when they talk to each other and all that. You don't have to push it too crazy. I think people have forgotten, like, red versus blue and all that were, like, massive forms of entertainment for people. So you don't need the best graphics, you just need to make it immersive enough and that you're like, "Okay, yeah, I paid $40 for this. That makes sense. I'm seeing some cool shots here and there when it's needed." Otherwise, it's decent. I mean, I don't think anyone will ever say that Baldur's Gate isn't a great game, but there's some, like, cinematic, just cutscenes with your characters, going through dialogue choices. You're like, "It's not the best." But is that taking away from the game? No. So I hope they do something like that here. If they drop it down a little bit and then put it for a summer release, I think it could be very, very enticing.
Mhm. I think a summer release would make a lot of sense. They do seem so much further on this than I think we were anticipating.
Yeah.
But with April 19th, the game is going to be announced that day, and we'll probably be doing a stream on the 18th because that's when most of this news will come out for Mandalorian and Grogu. That's Thursday night. But this one will be at like midnight, so we probably won't talk about it until the 19th here in United States. But this will be an exciting thing to see where it comes because they just seem so much further along than I certainly anticipated. But just because we have art doesn't mean it's coming next week. But yeah, I mean that would be amazing, and I think kind of a smart move for them. Squadrons really caught on because of the low price point. If they're trying to turn this into a franchise and they want to get people on board, Star Wars games haven't necessarily been major successes outside of the Survivor games, Jedi Survivor and Jedi Fallen Order.
Honor.
So maybe they lower the price to try to get people involved. Switch 2, I don't anticipate this ever being an $80 game. The only two Switch 2 games that I believe are $80 are the new Mario Kart and then the Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Switch 2 version, which doesn't make any sense to me. None of it makes sense to me, but it is Nintendo on their power trip. But we will see if people don't buy, people are going to buy it, so it's going to stay the same price. Nintendo never lowers their prices, but I don't anticipate this game ever getting to that $80 mark. But sometimes Switch versions of games would be even cheaper because they were worse versions. So, you could do a downgraded Switch 2 version of this and then a PS5, Xbox One, or Xbox Series X PC version that's a little bit more expensive. We'll see. We'll see what they have in store. Anthony, YouTube fan, says, could this story, or wait, no, that was the next question you have. Says Zero Company, do you think the story takes place during the original trilogy or the Mandoverse? Could the game in any way parallel dovetail with Lucas's unmade Star Wars Underworld game or Underworld show? I think you're talking about. It's not Mandoverse or OT according to the art. It looks very much so Clone Wars. Could it carry into those eras? Sure. I would love to see something that kind of spanned the course of history, but also if it's just a Clone Wars game, I think that's great too. It's a period of time where frankly we haven't had any games in there in the canon era of Star Wars, so it'll be nice to return to that. We haven't had a lot of focus on the Clone Wars or prequel eras in video games since Lucas owned the company. So I would prefer it to stay in the Clone Wars. So I don't necessarily think it connects to any of that. And then as for Star Wars Underworld, I think when you have anything unmade, there's always the possibility people can go back and look at those scripts for inspiration. But I don't think you're going to have too many direct connections to it. It does look like they are in some type of cityscape. Definitely could be Coruscant, but I don't necessarily see anything in the art so far that makes me think Star Wars Underworld.
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion. I think it's just a little too Coruscant rooftop, just general. So you can't really tell if there's anything. There's nothing indicating it's like 1313, nothing indicating that it's in the political sphere or something like that. It's pretty bland. If anything, it could have just been like art that they just found the background for, like Jedi Survivor, you know, previs before they actually built out Coruscant there or something. But, I think it's interesting to note here that Respawn has also worked here, on this, right? It's not just Bit Reactor. Obviously, Respawn is probably, like, the studio that they trust the most, right? And the fact that it happens to be an EA one as well, it's like, okay, like, they get a little bit of love from all sides. Like, Lucasfilm is not trying to, like, end everything with EA. It's just they're no longer exclusive. I'm sure that 10 years with them and, like, the lack of successes there and controversy definitely has diminished how they're, like, viewed by the greater Disney brand and, like, the video gaming divisions there. But, I mean, Respawn was the exception twice now, right? And, yeah, they might have lost their director or something for Jedi 3, but I think even if it's just a decent game, 2 out of 3, like, fantastic. That's more than what EA has done. But, yeah, Respawn being attached to this with Bode, and it's been almost 2 years now, so I don't think it's really spoiler territory. But Bode Akuna from, uh, Survivor being, like, a
Yeah,
Jedi in Republic Intelligence, the fact that the little blurb that we do get from a Zero Company talks about operatives, like, I wouldn't be surprised, and this is my first early Hail Mary out here. I think we're gonna see Bode show up at some point in the game. Like, I
that'd
think
be cool.
maybe like a cameo or something just to see, like, what he was working like, what his daily institution was like. Was he just on the run? Like, was he always inserting himself, or was he, like, stationed more somewhere and it was more certain specific missions? Like, that was something that I always wanted to see more and more of when Bode was coming about as a character and we understood everything post his turn. But now it's like, okay, well, there's no real chance to explore it further unless we literally visit some of his older sites in the next game. If they don't wanna do that, this is a great way to do it without, like, resorting to an entirely different medium, and you'll have Respawn and their creative team, their writers be able to have some influence there too.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's a great connection to pull there with Bode. I mean, you could even see a young Cal Kestis, you could see a
Yeah.
Seer Junda, you could see all these characters, who are popular with the Jedi games, and it would be nice to get that crossover for sure, especially because video games and Star Wars used to do it so well, and now we don't really get that anymore. Anthony, YouTube fan, says, "Could the story narratively align/parallel with Lucas's and Filoni's concept for the time between 19 and 20 BBY? And BBY, especially the upcoming long form animated series." Not really sure what you mean by that. Unless you're just asking, is this going to parallel with like Bad Batch and what they did in the Clone Wars and then whatever they're planning in future animation? I mean, it will because Star Wars canon is supposed to all be together, right? So if they're doing anything, they're supposed to be keeping track of the canon. It's supposed to connect very well, but I don't think it has like a deeper meaning of being connected to any specific thing in Star Wars. I like I said earlier, anything that's canceled, any ideas can always be used in future products, but I don't necessarily see this as something that is directly tied to any specific part of the Clone Wars that was either canceled or not used by Filoni and Lucas.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a game that stretches over different times, right? Like it could just start here and finish in the main story in, 1920 or wherever it takes place in the war. It could have expansions with different campaigns and all that. Like I don't know. I don't see why it'd have to necessarily be in this time period concept, but um it wouldn't hurt, right? It wouldn't hurt. I'm still not sure what you mean exactly by like parallels though.
And he clarifies at the bottom saying, like the hidden path and the rebellion and stuff. I just don't know if this is going to get into that yet. Like Senek was saying, I'm kind of hoping this is early Clone Wars, and Clone Wars spans 3 years. So even if this doesn't jump in time much, it still could definitely fit in the entirety of the Clone Wars. The only thing that makes you think possibly later Clone Wars is the fact that it's such a ragtag group, right?
Yeah.
This could be a group of people who were turned on by the Empire. It could be a clone who has had his chip removed, or a clone who has had enough with the Empire. But I think it's going to be Clone Wars adjacent. Now, it could get into the path. at some point if this Jedi does survive into the Rebellion era, but I don't see it having too much story significance to the point where it's going to really tackle that plot point. I think they've saved that plot point for future either live action shows, whether it's Obi-Wan season 2 or whatever they're doing with animation, and they focus on with either Ventress that might build out of Tales of the Underworld or a future show that they're working on in animation. So I don't it could tease things, it could connect to things, but I don't think it's going to be something that's like pushing story forward heavily in those realms. I think a lot of the story will be set in the Clone Wars.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense.
And then Anthony says, I'm going to venture to guess possibly coming out during the winter holidays when this gets advertised at Star Wars Celebration. We'll probably get the date before the third Jedi game. Yeah, it'll definitely be before the third Jedi game because that's not coming out for a while. That's not going to be coming out this year. But yeah, I think the most likely bet is holidays or fall. Like I think October is a good bet just because it's a little less competitive in the gaming world than November. November is usually when you get your big Ubisoft releases, your big EA releases, your next Call of Duty, all those types of games that just sell loads of copies. And I think this game could use a little less competition because it's going to have a much more niche genre and it's going to be a little harder sell to the general public. Just because it's Star Wars, more people might check it out, but it's going to be a little harder sell to the average gamer who's mostly only played shooters or only played adventure games or action games. Tactics are its own breed. So you're really going to have to cater to the fans of the tactics strategy genres, and you're going to have to try to make it accessible enough to people who might have played one tactics game in their life to try, excuse me, this game for the first time. Maybe they've just checked out Halo Wars. Maybe they've played one XCOM game. Maybe they played a little bit of Fire Emblem, but this is going to be something that's geared, is going to have to make both sets of fans happy. You're going to have to make it deep enough where tactics fans really enjoy it. You're going to have to make it comprehensible enough for a new player to where people who just see the name Star Wars and want to try to play it can maybe pick it up and get into tactics for their first like true tactics game.
I
So
would be
yeah,
one
I
of
think
those cases.
yeah, that's very fair. And most people haven't played it. Like even me, I play a lot of video games, and I've only really Fire Emblem's the main thing that I've played that's been tactics heavy. Like I've played a handful of games. I've played Halo Wars. I've played some XCOM. I but I'm trying to think. I've played some other ones too. I can't remember what else I've played, but it's not a genre that I hear new games come out in it that I haven't heard of, before. And then I'm like, I got to buy that. It's usually something that I have to hear people say is really great, and then I'll check it out at some point. But yeah, definitely a genre that's been interesting for Star Wars to go through, and I think it could be a big home run if they do it right. Let's get into the second topic here because we've talked about this one for a while, and that is going to be the new release of the Star Wars Master of Evil book that we talked about a few weeks ago. It was leaked online. This is happening. Some teases by Adam Christopher that he was working on. Well, last week we got the official announcement that Adam Christopher is writing Master of Evil, and it does have an amazing cover featuring Darth Vader. We got a confirmation that this book will be set in the years before A New Hope, following a dark journey with Darth Vader as he attempts to attain the power to defeat death. So this is an interesting plot line for this book, especially. I mean, the cover, let's first talk about the cover. I love the cover. To me, it's very indicative of some of the things we saw in the concept art of Force Awakens when they were originally speculating about bringing Anakin back for a scene when Kylo Ren talks to Darth Vader, when we saw the kind of Anakin fading in with the Darth Vader art. That was one of my favorite images from the concept art of Force Awakens that they didn't use. Would have been something so cool, but Adam Christopher seems to have taken that and run with it, using similar types of stuff in Shadow of the Sith with Anakin, and now here getting to fully tackle Anakin. This is a plot line that might sound interesting and kind of big and grand for some people, but if you have played the Vader Immortal VR game, this is kind of a plot line that he has already gone through. So it kind of is in line with what we know of the canon version of the character. Very much so could be something he's doing to try to resurrect Padme again, not just try to attain eternal life for himself. Could be something he does in the wakes of the trials he faces with Palpatine. We know from that original Vader comic run that Palpatine has, some concerns about Vader's abilities after the destruction of the Death Star and maybe even leading up to the destruction of the Death Star. So we could see that kind of play. Maybe Vader's had some losses over the years leading into this book, and he thinks Palpatine might try to oust him as his apprentice. Maybe he's looking for a way to take that next step, looking for a way to conquer Palpatine before he gets beat by Palpatine. So it could tie into that comic run, that Gillen comic run. Either way, it's interesting to know. I mean, we speculated on what this could be about before. Both of us lean towards the idea that this was about Vader, considering Master of Evil is a term used by Obi-Wan to describe Darth Vader in A New Hope. So, it coincides directly with the character of Darth Vader. But the fact that it's set before A New Hope also, I think, makes sense with that line. Now, I'm a little concerned just in general about whenever you have a Vader book, getting into his head is something that's very difficult to do. So it'll be interesting to see how Christopher tackles it. I think it's a little easier to do with, I know people in the comments are mentioning Dark Lord trilogy. It's a little easier to do there because he's still Anakin. He's transitioning to the Vader. How do we write Vader, an internal Vader here? Do we make him a secondary character where you see him from a distance? Is he fully the lead? How does it connect with all of the versions of Vader we've seen? I would love some references and actual like credence to Vader Immortal, because it's a story that's never really gotten anything in canon outside of that appearance, and it was really an interesting, fun story. But overall, this looks great. I loved Adam Christopher's previous work, so very, very much so excited for this book.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, cover is fantastic, right? And it's like you're almost seeing like a nervous system of him. It's not necessarily a mask. It's not fractured either. It's something unnatural, right? And I think that's what really I love about the cover. Um, that's I know you can kind of chew away at his mask. It does look like a lot of almost the Force Awakens. Proto Anakin fading into Vader, Force Ghost looks almost. Yeah, I wouldn't hate it if there's almost like a psychedelia level to, Vader and Mustafar. I think that's kind of implied a bit with him, like, bleeding the Kyber crystal and all that, and we've seen in other cases where it's a lot easier, it just doesn't seem as much of a strain versus that one, he kinda goes in his headspace with, like, his glowing arms that are missing, and then the rest is just lava, right? Like, there's some really cool things you can do there. I myself have not played Vader Immortal, but I did go to the Secrets of the Empire thing that are kind of sorta related to it, at the Void, so I want it to be referenced. I wouldn't mind if a couple chapters are just dedicated to recapping what you can of that game without making it like, "Oh, that's the story now, I don't have to play the game." Like, you should still value that medium of it, but I still think it's important to bring it up, and it's not like it's just that, and it's a cool thing that happened. It's gonna be pushing out games and all that. No, it's like it's got value too. With Mustafar is sort of being healed by the time of the Rise of Skywalker, where yeah, you see that, you still see the lava, but then when you're back down there, like the Lady Corvus and all her followers are the people that Kylo Ren is chopping down in the forest there, right? So it's like, okay, there's a lot more interesting mythology, and the one thing about the character of Vader is that he's so ominous, he's so disruptive, he destroys everything in his path, especially during his prime. And then there's a lot of legacy in the wake of him, a lot of reckoning with who he was as Anakin leading into that. But we don't really ever consider what he does to create myths that like extend past him and past his time in the universe, natural or cut short, right? With like, comics sometimes do this where like, other people are saved by him or what's convenient for him is actually like a godsend for some Imperial or some Imperial wannabe and all that, right? We kind of see stuff like that, but I'd love to see him, like, almost be forcefully inserting himself into, like, the Mustafarian legend and the changes there, like, it's not just him being passively like, "Oh, he destroys something, that's it," and, like, they don't know how to deal with it. It's like, no, he's shaping, he's crafting it. He's working against thousands and thousands of years of history, and he's becoming as important to, like, almost like the religious deities of these people and their cultures and what else we don't really know about Mustafar. So I'd love it to happen there. I'm curious if it's gonna be post. I wanna say it's gonna be right before, maybe a year or 2 before. I Master of Evil, just with that title being told by our original Obi-Wan, uh, it just doesn't make sense for Guinness' Obi-Wan to just be like, "Oh, like, I said that line," but the story's set, like, only 5 years after Revenge of the Sith. It feels like it's something that should
Yeah.
connect as close to that characterization. Reckoning, a couple years later, maybe Reckoning with Kenobi, like, that's a show that probably doesn't get a season 2. There's been spurts of times every few months where it seems like they're almost on the verge of announcing a season 2, right? So, this would be a good, like, testing ground for that too, right? If they wanna do it that way, flesh out what is already there, connect it, and then also be like, "Okay, what more can we see out of Vader? What more can be connected out here that is different, right? That is more familiar to movie fans, but isn't, connected to the mythology, connected to his voice as a character that we don't know and what this medium, as told by Adam Christopher, can really achieve."
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. I mean, I think it's going to be closer to A New Hope. It says in the wake of A New Hope, like the way. Let me see the exact wording they used to describe it. But it does say in the description that it's set before the events of A New Hope. So I think incorporating A New Hope in the description makes you lean closer to New Hope than Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah,
I'm expecting it to be at least after Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think it could be in those 5 years or so after. It could be that 5 BBY type of story. If Vader was to show up in Andor or something, it could maybe connect to that. But I think Vader is going to be it's going to maybe be that true transition, right? I mean, as the title indicates, Master of Evil, this would be the full dark turn. He's still dealing with some of the Anakinness of him in Obi-Wan Kenobi, and even in around 4 BBY, when we see him deal with Ahsoka, he's a little bit more certain of himself than he is in Obi-Wan
yeah,
Kenobi. When he says Ahsoka and she calls him Anakin, they have a little bit of an
yeah,
exchange, and then he says, "Then you will die," and he turns on his lightsaber. There's no hesitation in him, whereas when he's fighting Obi-Wan, there's still that conflict in him. And so I think this will be somewhere in that realm. It'll be interesting if it is the post Ahsoka appearance. You could tie that in as well. But yeah, I think there's a lot to play with here. It'll just be interesting to see the way Adam Christopher tackles that version of Anakin and Vader versus the versions we've seen in the past in other novels, like the ones from Lucino. Let's see. We had some comments here about this specific topic. We had Anthony, YouTube fan, who said, "Can we talk about that cover art of Master of Evil? That's so much with so little." My first thought is we're going to see why the acolytes of the Beyond love him. That's a good callback too, because Adam Christopher obviously wrote the character of Kaiser, who's one of the members of the Acolyte Beyond, tied it heavily into his stuff he did in Shadow of the Sith with Exegol and all of that storyline. So definitely could get some of that here. Maybe some Ochi stuff as well. He likes to write Ochi. We know that connection eventually comes with Vader in the time between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So there could be a lot of connections to kind of that transitionary period between Empire and then the Force Awakens that we've seen so much of that stuff collide in recent comics. It'd be interesting to see if what Adam Christopher pulls in post his Shadow of the Sith book, because it seems like so much of the stuff he wrote in Shadow of the Sith has been played up on in the comics recently in the last 3 or 4 years since he wrote that book. And so now getting to see him return to that, I think it makes a lot of sense for him to expand on that. And I think the Acolytes of the Beyond are a really good way for him to start to touch on some of those connections to Exegol and the Sith cultists and all that type of stuff that we eventually see. We just can't have Vader go to Exegol because he hasn't been yet. He goes in the Vader comics from Greg Pak, so we can't fully go all in with the connections and maybe some of the things he discovers.
yeah. It's it's a tough one too because I really do like the cover, right? And I didn't really consider the Acolytes to be on, but you do also have to consider that it's not just that, like, they're like, "Oh, it's the image of Vader." they're like collectors of anything that, seemingly is related. I mean, they get a hold of his lightsaber or something at one point. It's
Mm,
pretty insane, right? Like, they're not just nobodies. Like, they're not organized the way, like, the Knights of Ren are, especially in the original trilogy, how they're kinda more like Ravagers, occasional scavengers, just like a dark side biker gang, basically. That's kinda how I would best describe them. Just kinda roamers, right? Um, I don't see the acolytes, especially the earliest ones, having that same sort of energy, right? It'd be very interesting if there's some overlap connections, maybe that they are going for the same thing, whatever, but at least in that early New Republic era, you don't really seem to know about the Knights of Ren, and I'm just very curious. I'm very curious to see, like, how much of this mythology that they're gonna create, how much of the voice of Vader is gonna be, like, affecting things and changing things and making it more so of, like, a desperation for these acolytes to gain these objects of power and do these things exactly like Vader. There's gonna be some I think I wouldn't be surprised if this is just, like, a story that it's like a repulsive Vader. Like, there is nothing that is redeemable. There's no Anakin to it. There's just it's
yeah.
a monster, right? I think we need that. I think I love all the comics and everything, but they're, like, especially all his main lines, they're dealing with transitions or things that are changing and making him slip away from his, the murderous grasp of, like, that very fascist power that he's just fully sunk into, right? I wanna see what it means to just live through that, and then is all the stuff with Lady Corvus and everything in Vader Immortal, is it gonna be too much that it cracks him into, like, a more messed up version, right? I think it'd be really interesting to see because that's the closest to him trying to be Anakin again when he's fully Vader, but are they gonna go more like a classic fantasy or anime that, like, the resurrection turns into something disgustingly horrible and all that? Or are they gonna do something even more messed up because he fails there, right? Like, there's a lot of potential there. Master of Evil's gotta mean something. It's not just Dark Lord or the Sith Lord or whatever. It's like evil, just the concept of that. It's not necessarily just purely dark side. It's just primal almost. I wanna see what that means, especially with that cover.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's going to be some type of incident that causes him to fully claim that title. So it'll be interesting to see what that is. Anthony Tiff says Master of Evil sounds really good because it's the first time I think in canon we have had a Darth Vader centric novel. You would be right, unless you count Lords of the Sith, but that wasn't necessarily about Vader, but you do get some Vader perspective. Anthony also says, I officially. Oh, okay. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then says, I love the Dark Lord trilogy from Legends and the Rise and Fall of Darth Vader novel too. Yeah, there's some really good ones in Legends. That Dark Lord trilogy is incredible. So hopefully we start to pull a little bit from that. But I think it's smart to go with something here that's different in a time period that hasn't been tackled by Legends. You always are better off when you avoid one-to-one comparisons with Legends. So I think that's a smart way to go here. Let's move on to our next topic, which is one also you guys have started to talk about in the chat. And this will be our last one before we fully open it up for your guys' questions to lead the show. We do have some other minor topics we'll talk about if the conversation starts to slow down. But this one did come out today. So we have the Hollywood Reporter who did an interview with Tony Gilroy. Tony Gilroy has been making the rounds. We have new quotes from him like every day, and we have a lot of information from him. But one of the things he's been most consistent on is the fact that he has been absolutely thrilled with the way Disney has handled the production of Andor and Lucasfilm has handled the production of Andor, the way they've been fully supportive of his vision, the way they've given him every resource he's needed, allowed him to make every creative decision he's wanted to, and just fully driven the show, allowed the show to become what it is and really flourish. And I think that's pretty awesome to hear when we've heard about some of the other problems they've had with productions in the past. Just it's great to hear that Tony Gilroy and Disney have been on the same page this entire time, and that's continued with season two because it's one of the things that made season one so great. But in an interview he did recently, he was talking about how they've given him that amazing ability to have uh, full creative freedom, really. And in that, it came up that there was a legacy character that was involved in Rogue One, a part of some of the Yavin 4 stuff, who he had to recast. So the direct quote from Tony Gilroy is that legacy characters are really tricky to bring back. They're very, very expensive, and a lot of times their schedules don't work out. There's probably a couple people that we wanted to have in Yavin at the end who are in the beginning of Rogue One, but we just couldn't get them because they were busy. He also credits Disney and Lucasfilm for not pressuring him to insert the most storied Star Wars characters into the fold. On the creative side, I will never have an experience like this again. Gilroy adds, it's just amazing that they trusted us and they backed our play all the way through. He eventually says that they did have a character they had to recast because that actor was busy, and then the Hollywood Reporter clarifies and says, "So is that the reason you had to recast legacy characters?" And he just says, "Yes." So we that's left the internet to speculate on who this might be. Some people have pointed towards Bail Organa, obviously being one of the big characters who is there at the end or in Rogue One. He goes off to Alderaan at that end of that scene, heading home, and he's getting Leia to go talk to Obi-Wan. He says he's somebody he could trust with his life to go recruit the Jedi that Mon Mothma asks him to recruit. The other character that came to my mind as well, legacy character that is in that scene, and yes, has already been recast once, is General Dodona. That was the other person I thought of who could be in that moment. But other than that, I can't think of too many other people who are in that Yavin 4 scene who would be considered a legacy character that it could be. Now, Sonic, you were telling me earlier that you had heard rumors that it is Bail Organa and that Benjamin Bratt has been recast as Bail Organa in this. And if that is the case, I love Tony Gilroy's vision on Andor. I respect everything he's done, and I don't know what the case is with Jimmy Smits and like why he wouldn't have been able to do it, but it just seems like a really absurd thing to do personally. Like I would just rather not have Bail Organa. At this point, we've had Jimmy Smits be Bail Organa for like everything. He's returned so many times already. He's been in video games, he's been in animated shows, he's been in Obi-Wan Kenobi. At at this point, especially when you have Jimmy Smits who is still alive, played him at the same time period in Rogue One a few years ago. It's that's the type of recasting that seems outlandish, outrageous to me. They couldn't wait on that scene and film it when he was available. They couldn't film him on green screen and put him back into the scene a little bit later. They couldn't do all these things that they're capable of doing in today's world without recasting. If that's actually the case, I don't like that personally. I'm sure it'll be something small. I doubt they're going to give him this gigantic role. I'm sure it'll be something small, and if it's just one line, it'll be something we all get over. But that seems a little crazy for me. So I'm holding out hope it's General Dodonna or somebody like that, maybe another general or admiral from the OT who could be considered a legacy character, a Wedge Antilles maybe, or somebody like that who could show up. But red leader, gold leader, it could be any of these types of people. But if it is Bail Organa, I do find that a little frustrating.
Well, I think it has to be Bill, right? Nobody else's name has just been thrown out like that. I don't expect Benjamin Britt to be dressed up as Dodonna of old people, right? Like that's a lot of makeup to make him look like that. Um, yeah, I can't say I love it, but we also have to remember Rogue One is not a few years ago. It's 10 plus years ago when they went into production. Like it's fairly old. It's people have grown up with it as like their childhood Star Wars movie, and now they're actual adults, right? It's crazy to think about, but that is the case. So I get it. I do. I hate it as well because Jimmy Smith was in Kenobi, but I do wonder if this is just them being softly like introducing like the idea of recast as needed for different shows. Um, I know Jimmy Smith has been pretty prolific. Like he's been in like so many like NYPD Blue and stuff like that. So it's not like he hasn't been acting. He is also 70 something, maybe he's retiring from acting, maybe it would've been terrible scheduling, like, that was the one time he finally came off of his break, and it's like he's already got so many things lined up. I get it, I know with modern technology, it shouldn't be that issues. Yeah, I don't love it, I really don't, but I can also admit that how he looked like in Kenobi did not look great. I mean, everything in Kenobi looked cheap, unfortunately, and COVID and everything is to blame there. But I would say I was a bit disappointed in how they dressed him up. I felt like the makeup on that show in general was pretty lacking, and Star Wars has never really lacked there. So, I wouldn't be surprised if they figured, "Okay, getting him to look like he does in Rogue One might be a little harder, gonna spend a lot of time." And we don't really have a plan for him to be a big character, which, that's a little bit unfortunate, but I guess that comes down to the fact that it's also a little bit more heightened for a lot of us who've read Mask of Fear, where he's a fantastic character, getting to dive into, like, so much of his idealism, why exactly he's going down certain paths, why he's so openly rebellious, but so privately at the same time, doing all these things so quickly, so quickly, and at the end of the Clone Wars, right? So I get it, maybe they're trying to make him just that's the books there, make some references there, have him in a couple scenes, talk to Mon Mothma, that's fine. Benjamin Bratt, from what I've seen in other stuff, he's a great actor, and, facially, he does look fairly close. I think with the
Mhm.
right team, and with Andor's really high level of makeup, I can see that. I really do think that he can do the voice close enough and look the part that it might be like, "Okay, yeah, sure, for, like, 5 minutes, I'm cool with that." Um, I wish he had a role to play, but I think maybe it didn't really make sense to pay for Jimmy Smith when this is a show that went straight into a season 2 as its finale, each year being a mini movie with 3 episodes or, like, almost like a full movie in some cases. Maybe if they had 3 seasons, then Jamie Smits would have been there for that 3rd season, and he's got a character that shows up in 2 episodes, and he's in hologram all the other times or something like that, but it's not. It sucks. I hope that it's not him. I hope it's someone that it's big that we don't know about that maybe we're just blanking on, but it does seem like it. Um, all I hope that is that they make a sincere effort to make it as close as possible, because
Yeah.
I think they've already shown some signs of that, right? Like, I mean, Cassian in a lot of the TIE Avenger shots, he looks younger. He doesn't look like Diego Luna 10 years older than he was when he shot Rogue One. Um, and they did say in some interviews, like, yeah, they use some de-aging and stuff like that. So I do wonder if they're gonna just touch him up a little bit, use a little bit of their budget to make him look the part, say a couple lines, and have him really hit that accent that Jimmy Smits has, and then yeah, okay, sure. And then maybe that's like a nice soft way of like, does a recast work? Okay, great. Did you notice it? No? Perfect. Did you like the role? Great. And did it feel like the same guy from episode 3? Sweet. Right? Maybe that's what they're hoping for. It seems like just the nature of Andor season 2 being so different structurally than season 1 is making some of these things a lot more difficult than they need to be, but
Mhm.
maybe it's just a chance to try something too that is eventually going to be necessary.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. It is gonna be necessary at some point if they do wanna keep going with Bail Organa. I just feel like it doesn't really make sense. Like, the reasons he's giving for why a
Yeah,
Bail Organa couldn't show up in this show don't really make sense. Like, a Bail Organa, if he was gonna be in the show, at most, it would be for some type of council scene. It would be for giving Cassian a mission briefing and then telling him to go somewhere. It would be for a dramatic dialogue with Mon Mothma or somebody or Luthen
yeah,
Rael. I don't anticipate him being like somebody you have to have involved in every episode of an arc of the show. And so those are all things that you can either like say, hey, we can't shoot the scene now with Stellan Skarsgård because Jimmy Smits is busy. Let's just reschedule it and have Stellan come back and shoot this when Jimmy is available. If it's a one-on-one dialogue scene, or if it's a council scene, even better, you can have somebody stand in for him and then shoot him on a green screen responding to the dialogue. Like, there's so many things that make sense, and the expense of legacy characters type of thing too, that doesn't really make that much sense to me with regards to Jimmy Spitz, because even if he is expensive, like, really, is Disney really going to be like, no, we're not going to give Jimmy Spence $1 million to come back for these 4 episodes of Andor because that's just too much for our show? Like, I don't
that is
see that
already the
happening.
most expensive, like
I just don't see it. I just don't see it. It's so, like, to me, when you hear expensive, that's like legit legacy character, right? Is that Palpatine? Is that Vader? Is that Luke? Is that Leia? Is that Han? The only reason that doesn't make sense as much is because he's referencing Yavin. So that's where we have to speculate. I find it interesting, um, what they're gonna do with that, but it's always unfortunate. I know Batsasai, you bring it up and says, "Hey guys, good to see you." So Gilroy said he had to recast a legacy character to tie into the beginning of Rogue One. Who do you think it will be, or that will be replaced? For me, this sucks. It's very unnecessary, and that's where it does to me feel unnecessary if it is Jimmy Smits, unless he genuinely had no interest in coming back, then you do it. But I don't buy expensive for Jimmy Smits, and I don't especially don't buy expensive for if it is like a Dodona or somebody like that. But that's somebody who's minor enough. So yeah, it's got to be somebody who's big enough to make those comments align, and it has to be somebody who's small enough to where it's not going to completely take you out of the show. So we will see. Let's see who else. Anthony sent in a super chat. Thank you, Anthony. We'll get to your super chat as soon as we get through this topic, and then it'll be the first chat we answer. But then Anthony, YouTube fan, says, legacy character. I thought Gilroy made it clear there would be no cameos. I hope he didn't recast Princess Leia. Who could it be? Did any actors die who were in Rogue One? And Leia could be another option, especially with Yavin. It could be Leia. And I think with Leia, I mean, obviously, price wouldn't be the reason you have to recast her. It'd be because one, Carrie Fisher has passed away, and two, Vivian Lyra Blair is too young to play a Leia in A New Hope. So you'd have to recast Leia. So we'll see. We'll see who it is there. It could be Leia. I actually am for recasting Leia in that scenario. Like I've been for recasting the original trilogy characters just in general, because I think there's stories to be played by them. Now, where it doesn't make sense to recast is if this actress is only going to be Leia one time in the scene and never again. Then I think it's a little bit of a rough thing to do to recast Han, Luke, and Leia if you're just going to do that. But if you have casted somebody with the plan of bringing them back and having them play a major role in Star Wars in the future, then I'm for recasting the original characters. But as for actors who died, I can't think of anybody who passed away, major actors in that film, especially from the Yavin scene. And in my head, Rogue One characters aren't legacy characters, but I guess technically they would be because they've existed before. But like if General Draven couldn't be back, or if General Merrick couldn't be back, somebody like those could technically be legacy characters. But in my head, I'm thinking OT or prequel characters are more so legacy characters. But yeah, I think Bail Organa is the most obvious one because we know Mon Mothma's in the show. So it's not her. It's got to be somebody like that, or somebody who plays a very significant but small role. And so that's where my mind went to Dodona, because he has speaking lines in Rogue One, even if it is not the original actor who played him in 77. I think that's it for this topic. Let us know what you guys think in the comment section. So we're going to turn it over to your guys' questions for the majority of the remainder of the show, as Anthony did, and we're going to get to his chat right now. You can send in a super chat, guarantees your question gets answered, supports the show. We really appreciate it, helps us out a lot. So you can send in a super chat that will guarantee your chat gets answered. If you're a member of the Rebel tier on Patreon or YouTube memberships, you can also send in your chats with priority chat access as well. The rest will be first come, first serve. We will try to get through as many as we can, but we go for about 2 hours. So if we can't get everybody in, then unfortunately, we will not be able to get all the chats in every single time, but we will be running down through the chat. And let's start with Anthony's super chat right now. It says, it's crazy that Hayden Christensen was in his late teens and early 20s when he played Anakin. I think for a long time, his performance was underrated. It wasn't just underrated, it was genuinely hated by so many people. One of the things I've always found really just annoying, and it's very indicative of the times of the 2000s when the prequels were coming out, peak prequel hate really was Hayden was nominated for a Razzie for Revenge of the Sith, if you guys can believe that, with all the hate and hate or love now. There was so much hate and hate back then, and I'm just really happy, from a human standpoint, that he's gotten this swell of support. I mean, we've seen how much it's meant to him. If you guys have ever seen his appearances at Star Wars Celebration, when he came back for Star Wars Celebration, I believe it was 2017, when that was his first celebration in years, and he got on that stage and people cheered for him. He couldn't even talk, and he started crying because it meant so much to him, the fact that he was despised for so long, and people treated him so poorly in the fandom, just as they treated so many of those prequel actors. And the fact that he got through it is now, a significant and thriving part of the Star Wars universe. It's really, really touching to see that transition.
Yeah, I mean, it really frustrates me too, knowing that he is a good actor. I know sometimes it just comes down to the perception, the roles that you take. Star Wars, especially as the prequels took 3, 4 years to really be filmed and shot and everything. There were peers, and he came in episode 2 after episode 1 was already, like, off the wrong foot for a lot of people. So he had a challenge coming in, and then people forget, like, yeah, he was a young dude. Like, he was in his early 20s, and then he had to deal with a much older George Lucas trying to and Lucas, I love the guy, but he's not, like, the most charming writer of dialogue. And he never was, and, having the prequels be fully on his shoulders, knowing the stories, like, he submitted episode two's, like, shooting script, like, a day before, like, they were set to go to production. It was, like, insane. It genuinely was insane how, like, those films came out, and, yes, he loves to fix his movies in the edit, but that's not good for a performer. So many great stars are in those films who don't have great performances, right? And some of that comes down to direction, some of that comes down to writing and all that, and he had one of the most challenging roles, especially to start off as an awkward teenager dealing with some of his fascist tendencies and emotional volatility brewing into a horrible, horrible potion that's only gonna be egged on further and further by your closest advisor that's outside of the Jedi who's, surprise, surprise, a Sith Lord, right? Like, it's a crazy thing. And then, like, yeah, let's just throw in Natalie Portman as Padme. Your childhood crush, the person that you thought was an angel from like, that is a weird role to land for episode 2, especially with it being basically a soft reset. You don't have a teenage Anakin to build off of. You have kid Anakin, right? It's a big jump in that timeline. So he had a lot of challenges. I don't think Lucas necessarily met those. And then, yeah, Hayden was stiff. He was winning all that. But at the same time, right, this guy was in other films like Shattered Glass, where people are like, wow, he's such a great actor. Like Life as a House. Like there was reasons that he got selected for this role. It just didn't work out. And in episode 3, he's much stronger, like, especially when he doesn't have to say the dialogue and it's more about his emotions and you just see all the walls crumbling. That scene where he's looking across and like the music is playing, just Williams score, seeing Coruscant at sunset, knowing the dark choice that he's almost having to make, right, for his love of his life and all that, like, yeah, come on, that's great acting. You don't have to say or anything to do anything to be a great actor sometimes, so he's proven it time and time again, and when we finally got to see Filoni, who I don't think is the best at dialogue either, but at least has some sort of sense of familial connections in his writing, is able to get, like, a little bit of that original trilogy zip and zang that's I'm kinda missing with some prequel characters. What happens when we see him in Ahsoka? Wow, he's seriously a lot better, and he's got lanterns to build off of, or he's gotten real actual Anakin story, Anakin interactions, things that the Jedi are doing to Anakin, things Anakin's coming to, like, there's the war itself and the psychology of that. Wow, he got all that as, like, a database or resource. He got Filoni writing and a bunch of the other writers, and then bam, live action, and it worked. It worked, and you're like, "Wow, Hayden was actually really solid in that." He was good in Obi-Wan Kenobi too. I just wish they de-aged him better, right? It's just, like, it was always there. It was just, you can thank the maker all you want. Sometimes, you have to criticize him for, like, the position that he put his eventual Darth Vader in. It was not a good start for the guy.
No, it was not, especially in the court of public opinion, which was at an all Star Wars was at an all-time low at that point.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess we could compare it to today, but yeah, it was a dark time for actors in Star Wars at that point. But yeah, thank you for the super chat, Anthony. We appreciate your support, appreciate your comments. Going back to the top, it's Anthony Tip again. Says I'm really excited for the reprint of Revenge of the Sith. The new cover is great. Yeah, we really love it too. I think we talked in depth about it last week or the week before, but it looks really, really nice. I love all the features they're adding. As for our first true deluxe edition in Star Wars, canon, or at least in the Disney era of Star Wars reprints. This looks great, and I'm excited for more books just like this.
Yeah, definitely.
Anthony also says, okay, we already answered that actually. So I'm scrolling down here. until we get to the ones we haven't answered. And I believe it's Jerry Bernal who says, "Hey lads, really enjoyed your High Republic Phase 1 and 2 essential reading orders. I'm currently finishing up Phase 2, and I was wondering what the essential reads are for Phase 3 so far." Well, thank you so much for that question, Jerry. We will do a video eventually once Phase 3 wraps up, our final High Republic reading order when that ends. But as of now, I would say stick to the adult and young adult. They're pretty essential. All of them have had some type of plot point that's been important so far. Even the ones that haven't been quite as good have still had plot lines that connect heavily to the overall story, whether it's the blight that's revealed in something like Defy the Storm, which I didn't think was particularly that great, but it does have impact on that storyline carrying into Temptation of the Force. So each one I think is built on itself. So I would say the most essential as of now have been those stories. For Phase 3, similarly to Phase 2, the stories have been much more confined to their mediums. There's been a little bit less crossover, like in terms of big things happening in comics, which have then made a big impact in books, and then books and comics and vice versa. It's been a little bit more separate, which I think is much better because you know, it's hard to convince everybody to read everything, and it's also difficult for you to expect a comic fan to have just read a major novel that just came out and keep up with the weekly comics and all of that. So I think they've done a better job of sparsing out details in the different mediums so that each medium flows naturally into its next piece. The only big exception to that is that the High Republic Phase 3 first wave of Marvel Comics ends, and then like a lot of the payoff for that is in the audio drama by Kevin Scott, Tempest Breaker, and then it picks back up in the next series of comics. So that's the one exception, but I wouldn't say any of those stories have seemingly been essential at all to the main story of the larger High Republic Phase 3. So I'd say you could skip those for now if you're only doing essentials.
Yeah, I a lot of same thoughts. I will say Phase 3, the last book before Into the Light was Temptation of the Force, and that's fantastic and essential because Reith is doing and he's probably had the best translation of interconnectivity that we want between the different mediums of the High Republic. Like, he has the Echoes of Fear stuff that's set right after this book. You could still read it without knowing a lot of the stuff that's happening. You're like, "Oh, why is Comac back? Okay, whatever, they'll be explaining the book." But it's very minimal, right? But yeah, it feels like they took advantage of both the mediums and how that impacted what the character's doing there. And there's some crazy things with the Blight, and there's some crazy things with, obviously, everything going on, Jedi and everything that yeah, I think some of the bigger answers that will be unlocked in the final adult novel will kinda be tied to what Reed discovers. He is really Obi-Wan if he's a lot more of, like, a book nerd, right? So, yeah, it's gonna be essential. He's gonna be an essential character. He might not be essential, like, very actively in the final book, right? Obviously, with just how it's kinda been set up with who's gonna be going to Planet X and all that. But I wouldn't be surprised if he has, like, a very interesting send-off and connection in that book, despite his entire arc mostly being completed in that young adult Into the Light novels, right? So,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm excited. I hope for the best there, and, you know, we are a little bit behind on comics and everything in general, and that includes the High Republic, but yeah, I mean, we're gonna be a little bit more up to date on getting these final couple books in, right? We're not gonna just drop them for you guys. Like, it's just because it's become a little harder, just because we've kinda moved, like, middle school books and how we release like, reviews of those stories and the comics and all that has changed between Phase 1 and 2 and also through Phase 3. That doesn't mean we're not enjoying them. It's just there's so much and not much time for us always, so those stories will get their due on the channel. It'll just might be a little bit different, but we are still committed to, like, that completionist idea. So, stay tuned. That guide will truly be as complete as it can get, to encourage you and whatnot, but, maybe it does depend on how we feel by the end of Phase 3 and what worked there, what didn't.
Yeah, and I think and fortunately it's pretty easy to pick out the essentials so far because really it has stuck to the books that have been significant, and that's what we've kind of asked. Phase 3 has just been so spread out. It's hard to like really remember every little detail of comics and stuff that came out years ago. So I'll do a full deep dive when I remake those graphics for the third video, and hopefully we'll get you guys a full complete essentials here when that final book does release. But yeah, we're working on Into the Light. I just started it, so we don't get review copies of the young adult books. We just get review copies of the adult novels, so it's a little harder to fit those into our schedules when we don't know if what we're getting or not. So those reviews have to come out a little later. But hopefully, you guys are looking forward to that review of Into the Light because I am very much so excited to finish reading it. Next up, we have, let's see, I believe it was Anthony Tiff who says, this weekend I rewatched one of my favorite films, which is The Matrix. It's an amazing film, cast is stacked. I love Hugo Weaving as Agent Smith. And then later down says, do you think Hugo Weaving should come into Star Wars? I would love to see him in the universe. Yeah, absolutely. He's an incredible actor. He plays wonderful, wonderful villains. And like somebody says later, he is British, so he fits the Star Wars villain mold. But I think he would be an amazing villain in Star Wars, but he could be a great hero or Jedi as well. I feel like, we think of him more as a villain because of Agent Smith, because of Red Skull, but he's great as Elrond in Lord of the Rings as well. That's another, he can play a good guy, but I would love to see him specifically play a villain. I think he could be amazing as a villain. He doesn't seem too interested in returning to that many franchise things anymore. He didn't want to come back to the MCU. He still loves his Lord of the Rings, so maybe we'll get more of him in the future of that Andy Serkis Jackson movie and all that. But yeah, I don't see him coming to Star Wars, but I would absolutely welcome it if he came to Star Wars. And The Matrix is also a favorite of mine. I saw it in the theaters last year when they re-released it for the 25th anniversary, and that was a really fun experience. But that's one of my favorite sci-fi action movies ever, too.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like the idea of him just because of his caliber, but I think Star Wars has already started making a lot of mistakes with its shows, especially like Giancarlo Stanton, right? And he's kind of doing it again with the MCU. He's just playing Gus Fring again, and I get it, dude. I'm sure the money's good, but I wonder if it's starting to eat at them to be stereotyped, especially in these bigger franchises, by their famous roles that aren't coming from stereotypical positions, right? They have much more diverse, much more tourist filmmaking behind it and great source material, right? So I like the idea, but I don't think he didn't come as a good guy or a bad guy. If he comes as a good guy, people would probably say like be Elrond, right? And it's like, okay, do we need that? Um, Obviously, like we said with the villain stuff will be villains. It's great, awesome, cool, unnerving. Yeah, that's exactly who I expect. You know, Agent Smith. Okay, awesome. But I think what I would actually like if he was a little younger, I think he would have been a fun talent card or something in this New Republic era. Unfortunately, he's a little too old, right? Um, I think there's some really cool bearded films that he has in like late 90s, early 2000s, right? Where he was looking a little younger. Um, I'm not saying you can't age up talent card, but I think there's something more of like a late 30s, early 40s vibe for Talon that I don't think Hugo necessarily can hit anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he could play New Jedi Order version, but yeah, I think if you're gonna do Mandalorian talent card, it would be tough. But that's a good type of character he could play. He could be anybody. He's a great
Yeah.
actor, one of the best character actors out there. So definitely would love to see him in Star Wars. Anthony, YouTube fan, says The High Republic. I'm knee deep in phase 3, reading the novel Into the Light, the manga novellas, The Edge of Balance, Premonition, and Precedent, and the High Republic Adventures 2025 annual. Yeah, right now there's so much High Republic coming out, and we're on our way to that last part of the initiative. It's crazy. We're almost here. I'm sure it will continue in some form, but this main story, I'm very excited to see where it ends. Can't wait for the summer to get that last book. It's going to be amazing what Charles Soule is writing, and I cannot wait to see what they have in store.
Definitely, definitely agree.
Let's see. Anthony Tiff says, speaking of video games, anyone excited for Doom the Dark Ages? Yeah, I'm pretty excited for that. I've kind of forgot it was coming out, but I love Doom Eternal. I thought that was one of the best shooters I've ever played. So very excited to see more of it. Very violent, very fun. It's kind of crazy that it's been so long since we've gotten the third in this reboot. series of games, but definitely excited for it. When does it come out though? Because I completely forgot that existed, but now that you say it, I am pretty excited for that game.
Yeah. I don't know. It seems like a fun game when it was first announced, first previews came, and then it's just been silent. There's just something going on with marketing in general, man. I don't fully buy the idea that like, oh, everything is so much more microcultures. There's no monoculture anymore. And anything. That's not true. Gaming has always been so diverse, more than any other art medium, honestly. So yeah, I think they gotta fix something with these marketing. I know for movies and shows, they're, like, swallowing up the marketing, making it as minimal as possible so that they save on costs and save on their, return, right? Okay, sure, not great either there, but, for games, you kinda have to remind people with how long their cycles are sometimes. Kinda at least have to go to expos. Kinda have to have developers to release stuff on YouTube and all that. Like, there's many
Right.
ways to advertise it. I don't think it's been swallowed up, and, gaming spheres can be toxic. I know, like, Assassin's Creed Shadows got so much insanity leading up to its release, and then it still broke huge numbers for concurrent players and all that. Now I barely hear anything about the game. I only hear if I hear anything, it's like, "Oh, yeah, I like this, I like that, awesome, okay." And that's it. Right? So, it's so strange how games they need so much more marketing, but then once the game comes out, it's just word of mouth, and then 1, 2 months later, you're done. It's such a strange medium to get into, but yeah, I'm hoping it's just because they're trying to just save a little bit and then full spam people at the very end there, but no guarantee.
Well, they have the ability to market themselves, I think, video games when they're really good because
Yeah,
so much of the internet and YouTube, like what we do, but also what people are doing on Twitch and TikTok, so much of the culture is centered around gaming and publicizing great games and the people really letting people know when they love something that I think a lot of these studios, these publishers, these developers rely on that swell of support in order to market their games and less on actually paying for press and advertising. So it is an interesting world we live in now with the way things are advertised because so many of these things I have no idea ever exist until they come out and then you hear some people say they're pretty good and then you're like okay now I want to try it now I want to play it or watch it. So yeah, pretty interesting. Anthony Tiff says I officially gotten tickets to see Revenge of the Sith re-release. Yeah, me too. Very excited. I've got tickets for Thursday night and Sunday night in 4DX, so can't wait to see that. Both are going to be awesome. Want to go? I wanted to go at least twice. Maybe I'll go 3 times. Well, who knows? It'll be a hard one for me to not see multiple times in the theaters. I just can't wait. I'm a little bummed that last year got to see it with the marathon was so much fun we did, but like I would be so over the moon excited if it wasn't for the fact that I just saw it a year ago in this format. But very excited to try it in 40X as well.
yeah, I'm going with a bunch of my friends on Saturday for 40X. Like you said, it was awesome to see it, and especially since we got upgraded from just our regular theater room to, like, the RPX room because it was, like, midnight. It's like, okay, I've already seen it as in, like, not IMAX, but, like, still a premium format, and it looked great, the best I probably have ever seen it, and I'm like, "Awesome. How am I gonna see it in a way that's different and as fun and gets me, like" and especially with, Minecraft movie and everything with how people have been going crazy in theaters recently. I wanna do that respectfully, like, first of all, I don't really condone people throwing popcorn over people's heads and bringing live chickens and all, that's a little too crazy. There's a reason why people aren't coming to theaters anymore. That's you're part of the problem if you don't see that. But at the same time, like, having screenings, like and formats like 4DX and all that, that have people, like, who are ready to say hello there, like, when we see
Yeah.
Obi-Wan land on Utapau and all that. I think 4DX will be insane to see it, especially as we're going through it. Like, I can't imagine with how it starts with the Battle of Coruscant, what it's gonna be like in those 802 starfighters just moving around, like, it's a design for it. It feels like you're playing, like, almost like a game tutorial at the beginning there when you're watching that beginning, so
Mhm.
I wanna see that. I wonder how the heat's gonna function with Mustafar. I saw, Twisters in 4DX, so the water and the wind and everything was so awesome. So, Yeah, I'm excited. I'm mostly excited to see how the Youngling Slayer 9000 will feel. No, just kidding. But, I am excited to see it in a new format and that one that, like, it feels right to almost, like, be immersed, like, you're almost, like, in a roller coaster and you're yelling and screaming. That's kinda how where it should be happening. I get being excited and clapping and cheering in other movies, but yeah, again, please don't be like the people in the Minecraft movie. I enjoyed my screening of the Minecraft movie that I did on a whim. A lot of parents with their kids, a lot of teenagers just jumping and screaming for Chicken Jockey, but sometimes people are there to actually see the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Minecraft discourse has been interesting because in one scenario, I do find the like frustration and irritation by a lot of people a little off base because it's just like it's Minecraft, like who cares? But at the same time, bringing live chickens is insane. So that should never be happening. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what the crowd's like for Revenge of the Sith. I mean, I don't anticipate that same level of things because I think because Revenge of the Sith is at a different level than Minecraft, I think people would genuinely be ready to fight if somebody was doing that stuff in the theater because they want to enjoy seeing Revenge of the Sith. Um, but I hope at least people are cheering and they got callbacks or some things like that. Like I think that would be really fun. So really looking forward to it. And my theaters were almost all sold out, especially for
Yeah.
4DX. So I know there's going to be a really fun crowd coming for that. Let's see, where did we leave off? I believe it was Anthony saying, would love to see Ram Koda or even Nijad Halcyon. Are you talking about in the game in the Zero company, or are you talking in Andor? Because in Andor, there's no way either of those characters pop up. Nijal Halcyon won because he's dead by that point in Legends.
Yeah.
Um, Ram Koda could possibly, hypothetically, but obviously I don't really see it. When it comes to the game, definitely possibilities. Both were around during the Clone Wars, so if you wanted to connect to some Legend stuff, it'd be really cool to bring them in.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't mind it if it's, referring to the game to have Ram Koda. I think that's the type of character where his operatives make sense. Then you can kinda go into the whole point of how he distrusted clone troopers and, like, went only for these, like, human soldiers from Alderaan and all that. That works. I would like that. I wouldn't need it though, right? Like, I don't think I need either of those characters. Ninja's only there to, like, justify, like, "Okay, we're gonna build out the Green Jedi." It's like, "Okay, alright, Cornhorn's gonna just get special treatment and be a little crazy and contradictory to anything, even in EU and George Lucas's version of the Jedi Orders, but, that was how the EU was. Some things were messy, and then you still made it work in some way. So, no, I mean, cool characters, just probably no to Ninja just because he's also just such an unknown. Like, people don't really, really know him, so but Ram Koda, yeah, he was in visuals, you wanna see that for sure, so, yeah, why not?
Well, sometimes though, I think like a character like Nija, those types of characters that most people don't know are the fun ones to bring in because then you don't have that full attachment to them. Yes, there'll be a contingent of Legends characters who are devoted or Legends fans who are devoted to those types of characters, but you could surprise people without if it's Rom Coda, then people are going to constantly be comparing it to what they know because it has a much bigger fan base. So it'd be interesting to see if they brought back any of those characters. I don't anticipate that at all, but we will see. Anthony says, I've decided to save my money to get the re-released Revenge of the Sith novel. Yeah, you'll have to save quite a bit, $60, but I think it'll be worth it. We did preview everything that was coming out in that edition last week. So if you want to check out that stream last week, if you haven't already, there's a full breakdown of everything that's in there. And then we have Anthony again who says, one thing I have noticed is that many actors and actresses in Star Wars are Canadian or British. I wonder why that is. What is your guys' who are your guys' favorite two British actors? Mine are Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. um, that's a big question. I mean, I don't know how I can't name two off of the top of my head that like I would say are my absolute favorites. There's so many that are incredible. Um, but as for why so many actors in Star Wars are Canadian or British, Firstly, with British, it was because they shot Star Wars in England, and the original Star Wars was shot in England, and I believe all three of the original trilogy were. But when they were casting side characters or extraneous characters, one-line characters, tough characters like that, they were mostly casting local British actors. So that's why most of them are British. That's why they kind of and then because they went with Peter Cushing as the villain, then you have the main villain of A New Hope is British as well, and then you just kind of created this thing about all the people in uh, the Empire are British because of that. So it's just kind of a coincidence. As for Canadian, trying to remember who else is Canadian besides Hayden. Um, so I can't remember who else you're talking about who might be Canadian, who's part of the original trilogy or the prequel trilogy. Like one of the major characters in the originals, prequels, or sequels, because most of the sequels are the two of the three leads are British. Um, in the prequels, one's Canadian, one's American, or technically born in Israel, and then one is Scottish. And then in the prequels, the three leads are American. So, not sure who else if you're referencing anybody else who's Canadian, but yeah, those are the reasons why. I'm going to think about two favorite British actors. Christopher Lee is obviously one up there. Peter Cushing's great as well. I have a little more emotional attachment to Christopher Lee because of his appearances in Lord of the Rings, as well as his monster movies and Count Dooku role. Daniel Day-Lewis, one of the greatest actors of all time, is British. So there's that. I have to think more about some of my favorite British actors while Sanak is talking.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna switch over to the Canadian. I think we're forgetting such an obvious one of the goats of Star Wars. Garrick Hogan, who plays Biggs Darklighter, is Canadian. So I'm very disappointed that I did not think about that from the start. But yeah, he's there. Uh, just from looking up, I mean, it seems more a recent thing past Hayden, Manny Jacinto and Carrie-Anne Moss, right? Like they're both in Acolyte. That's only 6 months ago. But one that's a little bit more commonly known, I guess, that we didn't bring up, Paul Sun-Hyung Lee. He plays one of our basically, he is, Carson Teva
Postman's
is
Ripper.
our X-Wing pilot for the New Republic so far, right? Like, it's not a Wedge Antilles, it's not all of that, it's this guy. So,
Yeah.
he's pretty well known for a lot of people who, like, especially used, you know, the experience of jumping into Star Wars via the Mandalorian, right? Like, he's pretty well known for being a fairly minor character, right? So, yeah, I'm sure there's also more, um more modern past, Hayden, but they might be more like animation and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I was kind of taking the question as like part of the main trilogies, but yeah, when you put it that way, there are a lot of other actors who are from Canada. Um, I think especially when you open it up to all the shows, it gives you a lot more opportunity for a lot more actors to be involved in a lot of other things. But Toronto has become one of the big centers of film lately, and they're shooting. I mean, not too many things are shot in LA anymore. So they're shooting in all these different places, Berlin, London, Toronto, Atlanta. Lots of places have become. Dublin has become a big one as well. So there's a lot of places that have really become film hubs, and LA is kind of just more of the business side nowadays, or long running TV shows. So it is interesting how things have changed. But yeah, we've gotten through most of the chats now. So if you guys want to keep sending in chats, you do have time to get your chats in. We still do have scheduled, another 20, 30 minutes of the show tonight. So keep sending in those chats. I do have some more topics we can run through here in the meantime. Let's start here with one that is pretty interesting, although it doesn't give us too many details. And that is a little bit of information about what Shin is doing in Ahsoka season 2. We do have this new upcoming book called Star Wars Women of the Galaxy. It does feature a little bit about Shin Hati, and the character Shin, it details, teams up with roving bandits on Peridia, as we've seen in Ahsoka season 1. During her hunt for Sabine and Ezra, without Balin to temper it, Shin's impulsiveness could lead to challenging scenarios on the far-flung planet where she is stranded. So, I mean, this doesn't really give us too much information. It's kind of what we've already seen with her character, but it's interesting to note that she will be kind of this wild card in season 2 of Ahsoka. So that was one of the interesting tidbits we did get over the last week. We also speaking of Tony Gilroy, who has again, like I said, been making the rounds and just talking everywhere. He just has new quotes like every day. He was asked about a Star Wars horror movie, of which he did say, "Yeah, I think they're working on that." So that was kind of a weird, like, tidbit from him. It's not him. He doesn't plan on coming back to Star Wars, but somewhere he's heard that Star Wars horror is a possibility, which I find interesting. I don't know, like, as great as Tony Gilroy is and as big as he has been with Andor and as involved as he has been in this whole process, I wonder, like, unless he was directly approached about doing this film or being a part of the producing team on this film, why would he have heard about this, just randomly? Like, were they like, "Hey, yeah, Tony, we've got some cool stuff coming up. You wanna check out our the vault of Lucasfilm and know what we're working on?" Like, I don't know, maybe, but people do talk, so who knows? Will he has he has heard about that. Speaking of something we talked about a little bit earlier, we have Revenge of the Sith tickets did go on sale. So if you guys have not gotten your Revenge of the Sith tickets yet, you can get them right now. It is currently scheduled to be out for a week. But Phantom Menace last year did really, really well in its week of release, so well that it cracked the top 5 of the box office that week. And it did end up staying in theaters for another week or two after. So I imagine Revenge of the Sith will be out for a couple weeks. But if you don't want to miss it, get your tickets now for Revenge of the Sith before it is gone and out of theaters. This other one was a really big piece of news as well. We did have, for the first time in 47 years, Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, or originally just titled Star Wars, is going to be screened at the British Film Institute Festival, the theatrical cut, the cut that, George Lucas had basically, banned from being part of the main Star Wars saga anymore. It is now being screened at a British film festival. That has given some people hope that we could one day get the theatrical cuts put on Disney Plus. It's given people hope that we could get maybe a re-release in physical media or something of the theatrical cuts. I think people are overreaching a little bit, but the fact that Disney is allowing this is kind of a good sign for that possibility in the future. And with the storied lineage around the theatrical cuts and like the way people revere them and talk about them and opposed to the special editions, they very well could sell an entire theatrical re-release around this, sell an entire thing around like the only place to watch them is Disney Plus, like they could really do that if they wanted to. And I think they would get a decent audience who are very interested in that. So we'll see what they do from a business side. But yeah, that happened this week. We got some more Andor information. And of course, a small little detail that came out this week, but if you guys are Disney Parks fans, we are getting a Master Soul Legacy Saber. This is interesting with the Acolyte kind of coming back a little bit, not necessarily like it's getting renewed or anything, but in the next few months, we are going to have 2 Acolyte novels releasing. You have the Master Soul lightsaber coming to Disneyland, and you have the Art of the Acolyte book that just got announced. There's a little bit of Acolyte coming back. Maybe we'll see if the Acolyte does well, and it's kind of second life now, a year removed from the show finishing up. If these books do well, if the conversation around the Acolyte gets a little bit better, for those of you who are hopeful for maybe some more Acolyte or Acolyte adjacent stories in the future, that could be a possibility. And then finally, we will have a world premiere of Outlaws Pirates Fortune at Star Wars Celebration. They're going to be showing off the gameplay that we'll be releasing shortly after. That is going to be the Outlaws expansion that centers around Hondo. So looking forward to all of that. But out of those quick stories, Senek, that I just listed, are any of them, do any of them stand out to you? Are you excited for any of them in particular? Uh, or did any of them make you think about something differently in Star Wars this week? And what stood out to you amongst the rest of those?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to say definitely the BFI Star Wars one. Like, that's the one that's exciting, right? Like, and it's I don't know. I think it's also very interesting that I think there's also like a rumor that they're going to have him George Lucas introduce it or something, like, just, like, as approval. I don't know if that's 100% sure, and it's not unheard of, like, the Academy showed it in 19, someone else showed in 22. It's it's just super freaking rare, and it's not ever been this public, so I hope that we do get it, right? I wanna experience that at some point myself. I've kind of held off on despecialized because, yeah, I don't love everything about the special editions, but I I don't know how much I would love the original Star Wars, especially as with like what some of the limitations in the model work that I can't blame them for, but Lucas from 77 onwards is like, I wish I had computer graphics. I wish I had something more and more and more. I don't see the same issues really with episode 5 other than some like slight little frames around TIE fighters as they're spinning and all that. I think it was just Kirshner was just a master of putting everything together and compositing everything and storyboarding in a way that Lucas wasn't in the original, and especially with a much smaller budget that didn't balloon. So I'm very curious to see it. I think I'll still have a lot of the same feelings. I definitely will enjoy Han just shooting Greedo outright for sure. Um, but I am a McClunky fan, I'm the best of both worlds here. But yeah, we'll see. I'm just really curious why now. I guess it's because they're trying to like build up a little bit more memory for people like, hey, like in 2 years, it'll be 50 years, guys. Like,
Yeah.
which is insane. But you kinda have to start doing stuff like this, and I mean, I'm sure this is only just building off of what we've seen with, like, Fathom events, for all the films being released, and then last year's May the 4th and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this really could be indicating at a possible re-release of the trilogy in the theatrical cuts for that 50th, because that would be something really cool, really big to do. Uh, Funnily enough, A New Hope didn't get its 40th anniversary release like everything else has. When now Disney, especially in the wake of the post-COVID world where re-releases are so prominent and everybody's filling up theaters watching old anime movies or watching old releases for an anniversary. A New Hope came out right before that time, and so for its 40th anniversary, and so it never got that chance to be re-released in the theaters. And so I think doing that, not just releasing The New Hope, but releasing all three movies across the entirety of the year. You could do A New Hope in like March. You could do Empire Strikes Back in August, September. You could do Return of the Jedi in November or so, in some of the slower movie months. That would be really, really cool. I think for me, of course, A New Hope and Return of the Jedi would be the ones I'd be most interested in because those are the ones that are the most altered. Empire Strikes Back honestly didn't get any worse. There's only one thing that I don't love, but it's nothing I hate too much, and that's the change of the Vader line. When after he fights Luke, when he's walking to the Star Destroyer, he's like pissed off in the original version. He's like, "Bring me my ship." And in this one, he's very measured. In the newer version, he says, "Alert my Star Destroyer to prepare for my arrival." And that's the only thing that they changed that I'm not a huge fan of. Because eventually, even though they gave Luke the scream, which I don't really like, they took it out and changed it
Yeah.
um, to something better later on in all of the other Lucas changes. So I think where we are with like the new cuts of the movies, Empire Strikes Back is kind of as good as it gets because I like the Wampa that they added in the original special edition. So Empire Strikes Back's great. A New Hope, yeah, I've seen all of these many times without the special editions because I have all the original VHSs and I watch those all the time every summer when I was growing up because I didn't have a DVD player. So we'd watch the VHSs over and over again. And so I love those versions as well. But it would be really cool to see them on the big screen and live that 50th anniversary theatrical experience. I think that would be really neat. So that one definitely stands out to me as well. But the big one that stood out to me too is the Star Wars horror. Like I said earlier, doesn't necessarily make that much sense that Tony Gilroy of all people would be like, yeah, I've heard about Star Wars horror and they're really working on that, and they've got like I mean, doesn't give too much details, but he just says, yeah, I think they've worked on it. He says the direct quote is, they're doing that. I think they're doing that. I think that's in the works. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe he, heard about it in passing. Maybe he misheard something in the rumor mill because Oscar Perkins a few months ago was talking about wanting to do a Darth Vader horror movie.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's a possibility. But I love Star Wars. I love horror. I've been wanting them to do something like that for a while. I think it would help them as they continue to branch out into different genres and try to diversify Star Wars, make it very different, make it appeal to different audiences. Star Wars horror is something that you need to do right, and you need to ride that fine line. It can't just be this bloody, terrifying movie. It's got to have some edge for all audiences at some point. But it's something I'm definitely excited to see if they ever do decide to do it.
Yeah, I don't know, 'cause I don't know what would be horror that, Dead Troopers and Red Harvest hasn't already done for a lot of people. Right, we've gone the Darksider Alchemist way that I think, we'll see elements of that horror the more we dive into the Sith on Exegol, right? So th I it's gonna be there. I would love, honestly, and we talked about this way, way back, but when I heard that Star Wars Order, I was like, "Yeah, let's have, like, the remnants of New Republic, the Resistance go down to Exegol, clean up, and go onto the Exegol base," right? The Exegol center of everything where all the Sith are, and yeah, I mean, I would love to see how the acolytes and everyone else that's, like, taking care of Palpatine, like, what messed up things they do there, right? Like, I'd love to see if maybe there are some, like, things, like, fail safes when they open up that release, like, more alchemic induced Project Blackwing, right? Kinda more Red Harvest, but, like, in a way that could be, like, a cool, like, okay, like, this is just a follow-up for some people, right? So
Yeah.
I'd love something like that. I think that's something that doesn't necessarily need a movie. I could see 40, 50 minutes being really well done to be great. We're already kinda getting Romero zombies with Ahsoka season 1, so it's like, how much more are we gonna get? And how much is it gonna lean on, like, you know, what we see in Red Harvest, what we see in Death Troopers? 'Cause I can't imagine them not trying to play up a little bit more of the gory stuff, especially how we saw the Death Trooper when he was fighting off Sabine and his mask and kinda blown off and all that, so yeah, I don't know if there is space for the Imperial way of doing it, but maybe more of like a Force-based way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I want something kind of psychological. I think that could make sense. That
Oh,
could be
yeah.
something that you PG-13ify, like it doesn't have to be something that's bloody and gory and violent or
Yeah.
monsters or anything like that. Like they can do horror or the spirit of horror, something scary without it being truly, all in. And I think that's what Star Wars would have to do because it would, like we talked about before when we talked about Star Wars horror, it would feel like it's outside of Star Wars if you went too far into the cliches of the genre. Like Star Wars is a genre on its own. It kind of popularized slash redefined the sci-fi fantasy genre. And so when you incorporate sci-fi fantasy with other elements, they can be a part of the story, but ultimately every Star Wars movie and grounded in the sci-fi fantasy world. So if you're going to do monsters or you're going to do bloody horror, it can't necessarily feel like it's pulling out of that Star Wars vibe in favor of other cliches because then it's no longer Star Wars. But I think that's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Again, stay tuned this week because we'll have information out on our channel about when we're doing our Star Wars Celebration lives. We are planning on going live at least once to talk about everything from Star Wars Celebration. As many of you know, it's in Japan. So a lot of the information is going to be coming out for the big panels around 7 to 8 p.m. our time on the Pacific coast for us. So if some big information comes out on Thursday night, we will go live and we'll talk about it probably. Uh, Otherwise, we'll be on live on Friday, probably Saturday, to discuss the latest in Star Wars news, depending on how big the drops are, or do reactions to some trailers. So keep an eye out for all of that type of stuff. But I am definitely looking forward to that. Hopefully, we get some good information. We did a full guide on a live a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago for Star Wars Celebration when they dropped all the panel information. I just cut that up and edited it into a video. So if you're interested in seeing everything that's coming from Star Wars Celebration and some of our speculation on what everything could mean and what it could be, check out the video I just dropped today so you can see all of that information. But we will be covering that as it comes out. So stay tuned for that. This week, I also will be releasing the Andor characters who could be in Andor season 2 video. We talked about that a little bit today, but that video is coming out. It's all filmed, and I'm in the editing process, about halfway through with that. So keep an eye out for that video. It should be coming out Friday on the channel. Stay tuned for shorts 2 days or 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, every week, as well as polls twice a day, every day. We're doing character polls in the morning, and then in the afternoon, it is your favorite Star Wars movies and TV shows in line. We do this every single year in March, April, May, leading up to May the 4th. So hopefully you guys enjoy that. Thank you guys so much for watching tonight's stream. Hopefully we will see you guys all for our celebration lives. Have a good rest of your night, everybody. Good night.